Hey, how you doing?
Hey, I guess we're missing a couple of the regulars, so I'll just give it a few more minutes. Mark's out this week, so I'm going to be trying to run the meeting in his stead. We've got the same 1.0 proposal document to keep working through some of the items in, and got a couple of topics from Melba and Mike as well, who are both here. So Melba, how long do you think we need to talk about this diagram?
I can just show the diagram. I don't know what kind of questions will come from it.
Sure.
So five minutes. I think it'll help with the evidence of security claims and the SLSA, or rather the source versus build. But
Sure.
I don't think it's going to take very long unless people have questions.
Cool. Well, let's put that first then. And how about you, Mike? Do you have a
so it's more of, yeah, it's a combination of an informational thing along with like probably just some open questions of something that we probably should address in the specification meeting. So it shouldn't take too long.
Okie dokie. Sounds good. We've got some housekeeping as well with some national holidays coming up. Let's see. Right. Want to try and make sure that everyone gets to see Melba's diagram. So, okay, I'll try and do the housekeeping first. So we've got US Labor Day on September 5th, and I think everyone here apart from me is US based, right? So that sounds like a good one to cancel. If anyone has strong objection, please make it known. And then the other one is next Monday is a national holiday in the UK where I'm based, and Mark is out on PTO. So that will mean both of the workstream leads are out. If anyone feels strongly about running the meeting in our absence, be happy to pass the chair, but otherwise we can skip next week as well. Anyone object to cancelling either of those meetings?
No objection.
Yeah, I figure very few people object to cancelling meetings in my experience, but it's worth asking. Okay, sounds good. Got a couple of new faces on the call. Welcome. Well, I say faces. Got a couple of new black squares on the call, so welcome. Okay. Well, I guess that's probably everyone. So we'll jump in. Melba, do you want to show us your diagram and talk us through that?
You're muted, Melba.
Thank you. I was saying hopefully my screen won't be problematic, and in case this is too small print, the diagram I'm going to go over is in this GitHub issue, and I'm going to share. I'm trying to open it here. Trying to share my screen. I think it's this. I don't know how many. I have way too many windows open. I can't find it. So I'll just do
I'm
a
sympathetic.
portion of the screen. So that way you just see what I want you to see. Okay, give me 1 second while I expand this. And I'll zoom in. So this was my attempt of trying to visualize the why we want to separate build versus source and who should be attesting to what. And some of this also has security evidence claims. So I think it can be used for a bunch of different reasons. Now, this is just draft right now, but I wanted to show what I've been working on. So if we think of, a provider, like a hosted build service, right? And they do everything from handling the source code repo, the container images, they have the security tools, and they do the deployment if there's some sort of runtime or evidence locker. If they own everything, full SLSA attestation can be claimed by that provider. But where it starts getting tricky is, well, what if they don't have everything, right? What if there's a public, I did not mean to do that, a public image repo, right? Or public open source repo. They don't necessarily have visibility into how those packages are, not packages, how that community is creating the code, vetting the code, right? And so they may not be able to attest to those particular pieces, right? So that's kind of like unknown trust. The provider could say we have full SLSA attestation for build and source, with the exception of these packages, right? Because we don't control them. Then you talk about, well, what if the runner or the worker is actually on the customer's inside customer's environment. So it's behind a firewall. The hosted build service cannot see what's happening behind that firewall. However, the customer can say, I attest that all of these tools are trusted tools. This repo is trusted. The source code is trusted. And these are all the logs, all the attestations that you need to say, I, the customer, can vet for SLSA 4 attestation for source. But the build service can't say that because it can't tell what's happening. However, it does get the information from the customer because it has that communication. So it can attest to the hosted build service and what it's performing, but it can't attest to necessarily the source. And then, this is a different variation here where, if it's just the repo, the software, and then the rest of it is hosted, right? The customer can still attest to the source, but then the build provider can attest to obviously just the build part and the security attestation, et cetera. Go ahead.
Quick comment, if you don't mind interrupt me. You can assert that, hey, someone else attests this.
Yes,
and that's the
correct.
usual solution to this is,
Yes.
I can't see in, but I have, perhaps rightly or wrongly, I trust this other source, and
Correct.
you might too, and I can at least assert that they assert.
Yes, correct, right? But for someone to say, hey, I'm running this and I know nothing about this, I don't have any attestation, and yet I'm SLSA, let's say, 4 compliant. That is deceiving, right? That's misrepresented because you don't know what's happening under the covers, right? You only know about your portion, not the rest. But you're right. If someone can provide that attestation for you, you could say, my hosted build service is SLSA whatever compliant. And oh, by the way, on behalf of the customer, they are attesting, this source code compliance. But to say that you are SLSA level 4 for build and source when you don't know what's happening with the source code, that's where it gets tricky. And so that's why I'm advocating for the separation of source and build, but then also these diagrams could be used for the security requirements discussion, like evidence of security, right? The customer can provide it, or the hosted build service can provide it. And so this is just different scenarios. So yeah, that's it. I just wanted to kind of showcase any
I have a
any
question.
comments. Sure.
Are we looking to standardize the attestation that you were expecting everyone to do?
So there are discussions in the SLSA spec. Like somebody wrote, where is it? The SLSA spec talked about, a survey. I'm trying to find where that was. It was for the security requirements,
Yep.
right? Evidence of security claims as an example, that there would be a targeted survey. It's like, yes, this is good as long as it's standardized. But what does
Right.
that mean? Right?
Exactly.
That means that you would have to, I lost my diagram. Here it is.
Yep.
So then you can say, these are the types of evidence that you have to provide. These are the security tools, DAS, SAST, SCA, and these are the logs, attestation, blah, blah, blah. And then you'd have to provide that as a bundle, right?
Yep.
So this could be a way of standardizing that, how we provide information or what we expect. But for me, it was more of visualization of showing the different scenarios that could happen when someone tries to say they're SLSA level 4, and why they
Right.
can't really claim they're SLSA level 4 if they don't have full visibility. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Have you considered the case of reproducible builds, where at least you can do a double check of the produced images, though not necessarily the security tools?
I've not. Yeah, no, I've not taken that into consideration yet. This is still in draft. I'm still trying to
I got that.
vet
Yep.
it. So no, but I will put it on my to-do. And then I can stop sharing.
So,
Looks like Mike's got a question as well.
oh, yeah. I think this is one of the things that I also think is kind of an interesting challenge, because like one of the things that we stated as a goal or a non-goal is SLSA, as it's stated today, is not transitive. It's not transitive. It's not transitive. It's not transitive. However, in certain contexts, right? If you're pulling in other dependencies, yada yada, at least then you kind of you can ask the question to the package that you're pulling in and saying, hey, at least if I can tie back the source to the build, I can go and look at the source and look at the packages that they depend on, and at least rely that they're probably pointing to those packages and whatever. And there could still be, depending on if it's all packaged up together versus, hey, it's just dynamically linked or whatever. There's definitely some open questions on how that might work, right? Because you could end up with a situation, right, where hey, actually everything gets pulled down all at the same time, right? Like an NPM model or something like that. Or there could be certain contexts where it's like, no, I'm just going to assume you have OpenSSL installed and that sort of thing. But then there's also some interesting problems when you start to look at like statically compiled things like Go, where, hey, actually, you are pulling down all the source, including all the source of all the dependencies. And then it becomes, I think, also kind of a complicated situation there as well, because like, I don't know what the
Are you
answer.
referring to kind of like an internal housed repository of all the dependencies?
Well, I mean, one of the common ways, right, or actually, Go, since it's statically compiled, pulls down everything and compiles it all at once. And so that includes all the upstream sort of source and includes all of that in there. And just to be clear, like you actually now have all the source, including, well, not all the transitive dependencies, but anything that is written in Go is all in there.
I see another hand up. Gilbert?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so I agree with you guys. I'm having similar challenges internally discussing this topic. How much I mean, I guess, when do we stop tracking all of the metadata dependencies? And then how do we track, I guess, do we record those? Do we use some sort of like signature or cryptographic, or how like, what do you guys think on that level? And then what do you think of, I mean, because we can't control what people build, right? Maybe AWS or Azure or GCP have common attestation or a common, I'll call it images as code, right, that they publish. But at what level do we stop tracking? At what level do we say, yes, this is good, I guess?
That's a good question. I don't think we know that, right? We're still trying
Yeah,
to
we
figure
don't,
that out.
and that's kind of I mean, because I've per my experience, right, in building images and then handing that to engineering through a pipeline, right? That image gets tracked in an artifact, right? And that artifact, it could be any image gallery, it can be an Azure, an AWS, or your own, and then that artifact has some sort of signature, right? And then you can download and proceed with it. But it becomes difficult when it comes, when it is a black box, like the GitLab, like you mentioned in your diagram. I really, really appreciate the diagram though, because it gives a great view. So thank you for putting that together. But I'd love to have a discussion, follow up with anyone that's interested.
Cool. So there's a lot of scope in that discussion, I think. I think maybe the general salsa Slack channel is a good place to start to explore some of that asynchronously. We're certainly not going to be able to cover it all here, but it looks like Michael has got his hand up as well.
Oh,
Hi,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry,
thanks.
cool.
Sorry.
Thanks, Space Collision. I did mean Michael Scavetta, yeah, sorry.
Okay, so just to kind of riff on that, the and I'm sorry if this is a newbie question. When the attestations that are made, are they simply the wrapped essentially signature of underlying data that may not be transparent itself, or does the entire chain, including like the actual output logs, need to be included in that bundle and made transparent? And the reason being, obviously, as as a large commercial software company, their logs are sensitive, and there are things like that where the attestation that we did perform this action is different than the detailed what went on in that action. And I know that the difference between the open source world and the commercial world, like there are differences, but I guess as a spec, it would be nice if Salsa accounted for transparency of actions versus transparency of the details within those. I guess as we're talking about black boxes, that's kind of how I'm interpreting that. So just my thoughts there.
Yeah, go ahead.
So to Michael's point, the way I view it is the Salsa claims point to some evidence that is visible. In a skit world, I think the endorsement, which is the summation of looking at that or other stuff, is doesn't have to state what evidence it's backed by. To me, basically the dividing line for product software could be an internal skit ledger with Salsa claims, and on the public ledger you would put in the endorsement that you basically need to have authenticator rights to read into the skit store. I'd rather like to see Salsa claims backed by evidence being transparent. If you have access to the Salsa claims, then you have access to the evidence, and not divide those two into just different worlds. To my thought is that the public side of it would be the endorsement, and that's what the customer sees based on a reviewer or auditor that looks at the Salsa data, and it's the trust in the reviewer that the end customer looks at to make the decisions. It's a subtle break, but it gives us the ability to step between private and commercial software and OSS.
Right. Yeah, and we haven't done a lot of or at least that I'm aware of, a lot of the kind of intersection between Salsa and Skit hasn't been figured out, but that's somewhat covered today with the VSA. I forget what the acronym expands to now, but it's effectively a way to link multiple software attestations together and indicate the presence of an attestation that you don't have from a trusted kind of endorser.
So Michael, did that answer your mental model, or is there still some disconnect?
I think so. I mean, I think having the separation or not having the you can verify claims all the way back, but not necessarily see, for example, the logs of things beyond a certain point. I'm not sure that the public versus private is like, I don't know that we can be that, we might need to be more granular than that. It may need to be, you know, the world isn't just like internal and external. But as long as it supports the concept of a, and I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong words, but a claim that can be verified and that points to something, even if you don't have access to it, you can verify that it was made authentically.
Yeah.
This is.
Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, yeah, this is something that we had talked about, I think, a little bit previously. And one of the things we wanted to do was, I think, make sure we had a good understanding of the spec, and then we can kind of go back and say, okay, what do we expect to be always public? What do we expect to be private, et cetera? Because one of the things that had been discussed previously is, yeah, like, could you say, hey, somebody signs off on the hash of the evidence, right? You know, so you have a hash of the evidence, and, you know, so if anybody ever needs to go back and an auditor comes in and says, okay, now show me that actual evidence, you could always go back or whatever. So that is something sort of we had discussed. And then, you know, there's the stuff that's coming out with SCID, and we want to make sure that we interop with that and so on. But I think the thing that we wanted to make sure of also was just like, first sort of seeing, okay, let's see what is the evidence we want to make sure exists, and then, okay, let's see what evidence we expect to be public, what evidence we expect to be private, in what context, and that kind of thing.
I think that gets back to Mr. Scavetti's comment that not everything is, it won't be black and white. It'll be shades of gray in this area. The other thing to note is the auditing from a when things happen point of view, and a SCIT world with the e-notary system is similar to that same thing. You basically have to go back to the notary and say, show me proof of what you were given to prove that Michael was Michael and which Michael it was. Is slightly different than, here's the SLSA claim, show me that the evidence that it exists truly exists. Mind you, we haven't also got through the other one, which is when things time bomb from a legal fiduciary point of view, do we have any guaranteed way to wipe it? We haven't even got to those sort of discussions either.
I'm trying to extract an actionable outcome from this, and I'm failing. So if anyone has good suggestions.
I think there's two here. One is we have to talk about how we work in a hybrid model where everything isn't all OSS in the clear, and how do we achieve that with SLSA and SCIT and so forth is an interesting discussion. We can make some of them black and white and see how things fall out when we start putting together in the scenario. And the second thing is, what does it mean for levels of auditability if we allow the SLSA claim to be split from the thing it professes to point at? What would that mean? Is that a good summary?
I think so. If you could drop those in the notes, that would help me.
Okay, I'll write.
I think I got your first one. Thank you. So, just to keep things moving, go on, Mike.
Yeah. So actually, it's probably going to be short, given that literally everything we're talking about was going to be this sort of on topic here. So one of the things that's being discussed was, hey, as we sort of flesh out the specification, how do people sort of confirm that they are actually conformant to the specification? And there's a couple of different pieces of that, right? One is there's probably the builder, right? And is a builder conformant to the spec? And then separately, there's different elements of, is your project also following the rules it needs to follow to then be conformant, right? Because there's certain things that can be just done automatically as part of the builder, but there's certain things that, hey, your project, in order to really be part of the spec, to conform to certain things, needs to be done a certain way. So there's some discussion about, there's some folks who have already started like having some chats, a few folks from ChainGuard, I think, started talking about, hey, what does it take to become conformant to SLSA? And then I think that kind of ties back to some of this other stuff, which is like, well, it also really depends, right? Because there's also going to be things like auditors, right? And you're going to have folks who are making, public claims, which are going to be different than claims that you want to, where the evidence is going to be private, and that sort of thing. So just wanted to kind of say, as we kind of flesh this out, and I think the takeaway is just, once we have a good understanding of the spec, at least for the 1.0, I think we can then go back and say, okay, now how do we expect folks to sort of provide conformance, right? Because another thing that we don't want, just a big takeaway is, what we don't want to have happen is just, we want to have some protection around just a random person just saying, yeah, my stuff is all SLSA 4, and I have a SLSA 4 builder or whatever, and don't look, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that all feeds into this idea of the evidence of security claims that we've discussed a couple of times, because at least in the SLSA 1.0 timeframe, effectively, people are going to claim that they are SLSA, they're meeting the SLSA requirements, and we don't have a network of auditing in place or any way to enforce that. So the thing we've discussed is, how do we improve the confidence in the services that are making those claims? And the proposal has been this documented evidence of the security claims. So instead of having, or perhaps in addition to the common requirements that we've listed in the spec today, we say we have effectively a questionnaire type thing, or a templated format to follow, where build services can provide information on how they meet, information and evidence on how they meet the SLSA requirements. Which is one of the topics for today, is effectively, is this truly decided? And I think discussion today and recent comments from Emmy and Melba were maybe not all agreed on this yet.
I think I just had some questions on clarity. Like it said, no universal SLSA rating. So are you saying no universal SLSA rating for security claims or for SLSA in general?
I think it's that there's no independent authority that can say this thing is definitely SLSA level 3, right? So each downstream has to decide whether they trust the system making those, or the actor making those claims. And one of the ways we can help them make that trust decision is by, as part of the SLSA specification, requiring some kind of documented evidence that the claims have been met.
Okay. So I don't know how you want to reword this, but I think that would help. Because otherwise somebody might interpret it as universal SLSA rating for security claims.
Right.
That's it, right? So you can reword it however, but that was one thing that stuck out. And then I guess the other thing was about the survey, great. But can we make it a requirement that thou must use, SAS, DAS, SCA, fuzzer, right? Is there a way that we can at least say, okay, if you're going to make these security claims, you should use at the very least what NIST is telling us to do, right?
Yeah, so the common requirements in the V0.1 spec are mostly around effectively how you operate your infrastructure, what and how you architecturally design the build service. And we linked to some common requirements. We had some high level requirements like always requiring two-party approval for any administrative changes. And the feedback that folks have had is that those are a combination of too prescriptive in some cases and not specific enough in others. So this was an attempt to provide more guidance while not binding people's hands quite so much. So that's why I think Mark rewrote it to suggest including the common requirements as a recommendation, but having the evidence kind of document to effectively, justify how you meet the requirements and help your downstream evaluate whether to trust your claims about SLSA. I don't know if I addressed your concern there at all.
I'll have to think about it.
To answer your original question, I think the answer is yes, you can do that. The question is, should you do that? And other projects like scorecards and best practices badge do actually have such those kinds of requirements stated.
Yeah,
David,
yeah.
that does bring up an interesting question of the intersection of scorecards versus distributed trust and SLSA. Have we written anything here yet?
I don't recall seeing that in the document, but just wanted to clarify a scorecard versus an attestation claim, right? Do we really want to build a scorecard, or do we want to build a continuous kind of check? Hey, yes, this is a SLSA level 1, but at the next run or the next build, we see that it's shifted from 1 to 3 or whatever, and then at the third run, it shifted back to 2. I'm just brainstorming.
That's a fair comment. The question is, we should at least write it down what our thoughts were, like what the relationship is.
Yeah, we don't have anything like that today. I think there's some confusion in that security claims are mostly about the requirements that apply to a builder or build service, and scorecard mostly evaluates how, or I mean, I haven't looked at scorecard for a long time, but I think scorecard mostly evaluates how a project on that service is configured.
So then this is not addressing source at all. It's just about the build.
That's right. Or the build server or service, build service.
Will there be a part for source security claims? Is that just the provenance?
So source security claims are, we don't have well-defined in SLSA today, right? That's one of the things we have been discussing, is whether to split that as a separate track and flesh them out, or whether to remove them entirely. And I think we had general agreement to separate them out. What we don't have yet is any additional detail.
I struggle with that. If you don't discover the provenance of the source code or the bootstrap tools you start with, then the whole build thing falls apart. You kind of need the building blocks to be all there.
I think this is a like, I don't think there's a universal interpretation of what the term source means in this instance, and that's why there's a lot of disagreement around the source requirements. There's no what we've discussed so far doesn't remove the requirements to capture the origin of what you're building, but it's talking about separating out the requirements that apply specifically to the kind of source control revision control system. So things like requiring two-party review, and
but that gets a lot blurry when you start talking SBOMs that point at OSS components by hash or strong claims. So you're saying part of the source is strongly controlled, but the one which is yours is not, is kind of a mix. Like, we kind of need to flesh this out.
I definitely agree. We need to flesh this out. Yeah, the first agreement was, do we separate these things or remove? And I think we've agreed to have separate tracks for build and source levels and flesh out the source levels a lot more, but there hasn't been any discussion so far on.
I will raise the flag, which is the EO here did not protect against solar winds, and it's going to be this area next that we have to backfill. If we don't protect source, then basically we don't have a solution for solar winds.
So to take a step back, I think the thing here with so I want to kind of separate out tracing the build back to source, which that is something that we're doing, from the, hey, does that source go through two-person review and some of the other requirements that we had, because we wanted to separate those two things. Because one is absolutely, like, if how do you have provenance if you aren't making a claim about provenance? But the key here I think is we do want to make sure that the key piece here is that provenance piece, so that, hey, yes, this source got pulled in this way, we recorded these things, this was the output, which is separate than some of the other things like the source levels, which we do want to include at some point, which is, yes, it's stored in this way, it has gone through two-person code review, and that kind of thing.
I have a hard time just detangling those two. Truly, I do. Because I know there's the business cadence of potentially there's a break in the middle of the night, somebody comes in and makes a change, and a single person reviewer until the next morning, where somebody then follows it up and does a second review. That should release the gates from a SLSA point of view, that this has now reached some milestone because it's continuous. We kind of let this language too far. Either we need to break this off into a separate discussion so we can come back with a proposal, or this is just continue to flounder.
Yeah, okay. So I agree that we need to come back with a proposal. Is that, are you volunteering to come up with something, Roy, or just raising the flag?
For the next 2 weeks, I'm kind of stuck with the charter for SCIT, trying to drive that to completion.
Sure.
I would like somebody else to pick this up, if they could. I'm willing to get other people to help in this area, but I think we kind of need to backfill and settle on what we want here.
So does this go back to that GitHub issue that we had about source and build and the why we separated out? It sounds like it, but I just want to make sure.
I believe it is, yeah.
I definitely don't want to kick things out because it's hard for some tool chain to reach SLSA level 4. That would be the wrong decision. If we base it on what we think is necessary from a security and provenance point of view, then that's a different. But if it's coming back to, hey, this is super hard for X, Y, Z, I'm less willing to do that.
So I think there's also, I just want to kind of, I guess, ask a question here, right? Because so far, I think the majority of the stuff in the specification has mostly been focused on provenance, on not necessarily making claims about the trustworthiness of actually what is being built, just that you could always go back and say, oh, this is the thing I installed. I go back eventually to the claims. I go a bit back to these things, and I see that, oh, yes, this was, the source code was bad, right? And because when I look through the levels here, I'm seeing stuff like level 1 is, hey, if you're not recording elements of your build, how do you know what build even started this? Level 2 is saying, let me start associating identities with those attestations that I'm signing, right? So now I can actually know at some level, I can go back to, hey, I know that this build service is the thing that built it. And then SLSA 3 provides some non-falsifiability elements, which is like, hey, you're using single-use certificates, keys, et cetera, to do the signing. So now it's not just that, it's not just the identity of the build service, but a build service at a particular time with these particular parameters is the thing that actually built the thing. And then SLSA 4 is that sort of additional level on top, which is now that you're doing it potentially, let's say, reproducibly or hermetically, you have significantly more guarantees. And I think none of those things really talk to the actual underlying security of the actual code, right? Because I could write, and I think we already kind of went over this, I could write SLSA level 4 malware. But the thing that SLSA level 4 gives me is like, I know that it must have been the source code that is bad as opposed to the build service.
No, you have no clue. So let me back up for a minute. Why is single-use certificates valuable in SLSA level 3? Why did you bring that up?
So these are single-use certificates tied back to like a workload identity.
Yeah, but why does that matter? Why single use versus multiple use is any stronger? I'm just picking at something here going, we need to be really crisp what that gave us, because I don't see that helping any security guy going, huh, why, what does that got to prove?
I think, I mean, I haven't read that part, but I've thought about this before. I think that would prove that that certificate's ephemeral and it can only be used at one time for that one transaction.
Right, but they didn't turn around. We turned around and said the build services now has to sign all the evidence, and I have 150 certificates for the same entity. You know, just buried the reviewer in. How are they the same identity? Right. So there's pluses and minuses.
So it's still the same root of trust, just to be clear, is just that the actual signing, like the thing that's being used to do the signing. So if I were to go in and I have a malicious build and I copy that signing secret somehow external, I can't actually use it. It's not valuable. If I have a static certificate, great. That certificate gets.
Now you're getting into a whole bunch of security stuff. I don't want us to get hung up on, hey, single sign use certificates are much better than multi-use certificates, because now I can start bringing in TPMs and HSMs and a whole bunch of other stuff, and you're lost at this point, right?
That's not a claim that's also makes, though. That's just
correct, exactly. Which is why I'm saying we should skirt around this issue. Don't ever say, hey, SLSA level 3 is better because we do single use certificates. Ever.
So I mean, then we'll table the topic for now, but SLSA level 3 does have the non-falsifiability requirement. But yeah.
I mean, there's different ways to achieve that, right?
Yep.
Okay, but we've agreed, I guess we'll table this one.
Back to the original claim, right? I can compromise the tools, I can compromise the OS, I can compromise the source code. So all three of those are important as inputs into this process. Right now, we don't have a solution for other than the OSS components that are coming in and being listed in the the SBOM. And we have to solve.
Well, from the provenance perspective, the can't remember if I'm using the right term, but the materials are listed regardless of whether they're open source or not, right? So we list
Not in the public SBOM, we don't.
Okay. I think this comes back to your earlier topic on like exploring the modeling of open source versus hybrid open source plus proprietary component models.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so yeah,
What I would love to do, sorry for cutting up. What I'd love to do is to say, hey, let's make SLSA cover this whole problem space, not just try and divide it and take a sliver of it.
Oh, sure. That's I believe that's the goal.
Yep.
I should say I'm not aware of like any fundamental inconsistencies that would prevent us from achieving that goal, but I will admit that I work purely in the open source space, so I probably don't have the breadth of experience that others do. So we should definitely figure out a way to model this and explore it somewhat to make sure that we are covering all of our bases here. Okay. Yeah, that was so. What's the best way to move forward on that discussion and modeling?
So the document that we started for how we replicate and where the intersection between SLSA and SCIT needs to be fleshed out and how we start sharing these around. I think this discussion of source code and build tools and so forth, we need to bring it to a head in the next 3 weeks. I'm looking for a volunteer to help drive it. I don't mind contributing, but I can't drive at the moment.
Did you say, I'm not sure if I interpreted you correctly, but did you say there's already some documents around the interoperability with SCIT?
There was a discussion of how to distribute SLSA that was created last Friday. Let me go see if I can find.
Okay. Was this in the
SLSA tools meeting? This is in the SLSA tools meeting.
Okay.
So kind of need to fill that up.
So let's try and take this offline and find some stakeholders who can drive this forward, unless there are any volunteers on the call who want to put their hand up and have their name written down next to it right now.
Can you repeat what people are volunteering for? Because I lost what that action item was.
So there's sort of 3 interrelated pieces, I think. One is how SLSA can be applied to a model where you have some open source components and some proprietary components. There's the source code leveling, which Roy is asserting links to that specifically. I think Roy will correct me if I'm wrong. And then this is how this all interoperates with SCIT, which is supply chain.
I think the third one should have been in the Bootstrap tools.
Okay.
Like, where do I get the compilers from? Where do I get the package managers from?
Yes, the first one about open source versus, private. I mean, I can take that. That's what I was trying to convey, but I didn't finish all the diagrams. And I think that helps maybe with the source code leveling, if I understand that right. I think that's just what are the requirements for source versus build? Is that what it is?
I think, Melba, that would be a good start and lead into the problem space.
Yeah, okay. But the SCIT is a positioning meeting, is it not? I know you mentioned that, Roy, in the positioning meeting.
I posted in the link to, isn't a position meeting, to say, how do we distribute SLSA claims publicly? Gets into what SCIP is trying to do and whether we use ORAS as a stepping stone today to start distributing publicly SLSA claims. So this document is about where do we think we're going to write and publish in the short term.
Okay. I'd need to read up on this since I'm not
Well, we had to
familiar.
fill out the document first. We just created an empty document on Friday, so.
So just to clarify on the sourcing levels, could we give an example what you mean on sourcing levels? Just so I can understand it. I mean, I definitely want to help somewhere and drive some of this, but.
I can take a whack at this from a source control point of view. We kind of need to backfill what the EO didn't, which was how to protect against solar winds. There's two aspects of this. One is, do you require two-person code reviews, and how do you in a running system attest to that? And is it fluid and dynamic? In the case of a build break through the night, and you call somebody in at 2 o'clock in the morning, does he still have to have the two-person code reviewer, or does he get by with one and we produce the bits on the backside, but you're stopped from deploying it or testing it until somebody comes in the next morning and applies the second review? Like, how does that flow? Right? It isn't that everything is met before we start the build. It may be that we end up having to recover a build and continue on. And for most projects, the build is so short, this really doesn't matter. But for something like the Office and Visual Studio and Windows, those can be multi-hours and hours and hours of build.
Okay, got it. Thanks for the example.
It's as simple as example to go, oh, how would we solve that? And to me, having the SLSA claim pop up when the person came in Monday morning was the way I was thinking that this would be solved.
Yeah, we have 6 minutes, so I don't think we're going to be able to dig into this, but I'm definitely interested to dig into that because as I understood the solar winds attack, it was that it wasn't that the source control system was tampered with, it's that file was copied in by a compromised build tool, right?
And the private key was for signing the software was stolen.
So the SolarWinds itself was watched for MS Build to launch, replace a file, revert the file when MS Build exited, so there was no trace from the source control system point of view. On the other hand, that's where the build provenance saying, hey, nobody mucked with the box, or we have hashes of files and so forth. But that doesn't preclude the, hey, I compromised your source control on entry or on the wire. So when you pull the specific file in, that it didn't get tainted at that point. Like, how do you validate it back to source control to say this hash is actually met by two-person code review?
Right.
And the nasty one that comes into this is if you get into a world of cached builds. So if you had a content addressable system, somebody on a L5 branch or way off on a branch puts in a compromise, reverts it, but it's now into the cache. And if they were able to compromise this on the running system, you'd pull the binary from the compromised branch, and it would, right? So there's cache poisoning in the whole works that has to be worked through here.
Yeah, so I don't disagree that, I think the source requirements are definitely an area that we need to develop, and the current SLSA requirements do bind or do model that like source code to what was built, mapping, and they're intended to prevent the SolarWinds style attack, amongst others, which is why I was curious about that claim.
This also gets into Git bomb too. So this is where another intersection point.
Yeah. I don't know any Git bomb experts, but if you do,
We have a few.
useful. Okay. So given we have 3 minutes left, I don't try and start a new topic. Mike Lieberman, did we cover your, I think we covered your conformance topic, right?
Yeah, so we did. It's just something to kind of keep in mind as we begin to build this out, is also like, hey, how do folks sort of attest, or not attest, that's an overloaded term. How do they sort of say, yes, we are doing these things, like we have a salsa builder that is this, and make that, you know, public. In fact, it's actually something that got sent to the mailing list. Is somebody is asking like, hey, we believe to be salsa 4. We want to make sure that you know, what requirements do we need to do before we can, you know, publicly claim we're salsa 4.
Got it, thanks. Okay. So yeah, just to loop back, desperately trying to close out something. Evidence of security claims. I think we heard Melba's clarifications. Emmy, did you have anything you wanted to discuss on the evidence of security claims piece?
Sorry, my 2-year-old just walked in the room.
Hi, 2-year-old.
No, I don't think anything that hasn't been discussed. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I'd like to understand the reservations, see if we can address them and move this one forward. I see you've left a comment in the talk, so I'll try and follow up on that this week, and hopefully we can figure that out.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks everyone for the time. It was a lot livelier than I was expecting, and we shall reconvene in, is it 3 weeks? I think it is. Try and follow up offline on some of these things, especially source code leveling and the evidence of claims.
So the meeting next week is canceled due to Labor Day.
Next week, both Mark and myself are out, and the week after that is Labor Day.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.